When I first made the worst to best video last year on my main channel, I really just did that purely for fun. I wasn't counting on anyone to see it, but then people actually watched that crap, and considering that the format was that of CellSpecs' more superior videos, and that I practiced a lot of line ripping, I felt really bad about it. And also people saw through that facade, so that's nice. With that said, I thought that I should remake the video and actually say my own takes about each film, as well as throwing in a few additions that I didn't get to see last year. So here we are again, watching and reviewing these animated films. Let's see if I can consistently say original stuff this time. Fearless is still the worst 2020 film that I have seen. I'll give it some credit in that it's not as bad as I remember it being. It's not painful anymore, it's just excruciatingly and utterly boring. The dialogue does not feel natural. I, for the life of me, can't remember any of the prominent characters' names other than Lightspeed, who I only remember because he did absolutely nothing throughout the movie. The conventional gamer guy and prim and proper girl get to be present. Have I mentioned that it looks ugly? Honestly, there's nothing else that I can say, it's just that awful. And for those wondering, I still have not seen Bobbleheads, and I'm never going to. Like Fearless, this movie is a bit better than I remember it being, but it doesn't help when the film is aggressively mediocre. The idea of a new cinematic universe isn't all that bad, but it seems as if the people behind production didn't exactly know how to start one, as this serves as more of a Hanna-Barbera crossover than a proper instigator for a massive film franchise. And taking a property that is well known for its abundance of mystery and horror and turning it into a conventional action film does not help. Shaggy and Scooby-Doo's relationship is pretty good, if not insufficiently developed. Plus, the Scooby-Doo characters get sidelined for most of the film, and the celebrity voice acting is just... it's not voice acting, it's just saying stuff. Granted, there is decent comedy at some intervals, the action is kind of okay in some cases, and Dick Dastardly is entertaining along with Dynamite, still probably one of the weakest films of the year. Our first new addition to the roster is a mediocre movie about magical animal crackers that has a lot of celebrity voices. Like, a lot. So that automatically docks away some points. Oh yeah, and the side characters are kinda useless and forgettable, though if we want to talk about forgettable characters, I guess the villains are inconceivable messes all throughout. But the narrative is paced fairly well as decently constructed. And the main family is pretty wholesome, plus the climax is kind of creative given its animal crackers concept. Despite all that though, it's just not particularly memorable. It's not good, but it's not terrible, it's just bad. After watching the hellscape that is the 2021 Tom and Jerry movie, revisiting the Sonic movie is kind of a breath of fresh air. Not the 96 movie, the one that came out last year, though the OVA is better than this by a long shot. Ben Schwartz gives a pretty great vocal performance for Sonic, which I kind of like better than Roger Craig Smith, but nobody can ever touch Jason Griffith in that regard. Sonic himself is a literal ball of fun in this movie, being very energetic and goofy, but also undergoing an arc involving loneliness. But frankly, that one deleted scene needed to be kept in the movie in order for the arc to properly function, but as is, it's fine, I guess. Jim Carrey gives a great performance as Dr. Robotnik/Eggman, and the comedy is way better than Tom and Jerry. Still, no other character besides Sonic and Eggman stands out even by a hair, and there are some cases of film logic BS. Still, better than Tom and Jerry 2021. Have I complained about that movie enough? Trolls World Tour is just okay. It's not bad, it's just... it's fine. The characters are consistent, Barb is a pretty entertaining character, and it does have something to say about embracing different cultures, but it is somewhat hypocritical in its message given how Poppy wins in the end. The songs are okay, but I don't particularly like them. And for a film about different cultures, it doesn't really touch on third culture kids that much. Like, okay, I know that was kind of touched upon and it wasn't really the main focus, but as a TCK, I do want to be seen somehow. Even then, this film's fine. It's not anything special, just decent. There are bits and pieces of Candace Against the Universe that I do like conceptually, but ultimately in execution could have been done better. Making Candace the main character and examining her bond with her brothers is a neat idea, but in the film it comes off a bit too oversimplified. The mere presence of an antagonist, as if that's necessary for this inner conflict, is enough to make her character arc less intricate than it seems, even if the villain herself is actually pretty entertaining. There are undoubtedly some great running gags in the movie, and it's always nice to see Doofenshmirtz doing whatever he's doing. If anything, I just wish that Candace's arc was just more sufficiently developed without being pushed forward by outward forces. Otherwise, this movie's okay. If I ever want to feel like I'm on a whole nother plane of existence without the cost of feeling existential dread, I'll just watch this movie. The entire experience feels like an elongated acid trip, as expected of 4C, but even more so this time considering everything. The first half begins with somewhat ambiguous but heartwarming interactions between the schoolgirl Ruka and these two sea creature-esque boys that are being experimented on. But as it goes on, more firewood gets thrown into the confusion bonfire, and it doesn't help that the new information is presented in cryptic poetic phrases. But then in the second half we spend, I kid you not, 60 minutes with Ruka having the most psychedelic experience of her life. That's 60 whole minutes of abstract imagery and the universe literally bending. It's really hard to get a grip on as a story even with the characters, but it's still pretty to look at. Definitely in that last act. It's a fine movie on its own. It is interesting. My consensus for Over the Moon has remained consistent ever since I first saw it. The first act is amazing since it sets up our characters greatly and showcases a lot of Asian culture that is charmingly nostalgic to me personally. Then we get to the actual moon with the best character singing the best song, followed closely by the ping pong rap battle, but then Gobi appears and all hell breaks loose. Even with historical context, the mooncake plot point is kind of out of left field, and that last act is essentially a therapeutic musical number. Overall, the movie has a really solid start that kind of eventually just crashes in the end. I feel like I'm supposed to like Soul, which I do, but not as much as certain others. This is a beautiful film with incredibly stylistic visuals, its message of existentialism is very solid, and the minor subtext about neurodivergent kids is something that I can appreciate greatly. Plus, that last act is pretty anxiety-inducing. But there is one thing that I have been critical of since the start. The second act is just a bit too conventional for me. The fact that it was a body swap was already a red flag, not helped by the so-called wacky secondhand embarrassment hijinks that followed immediately afterward. Still, the barbershop scene is great, and I like 22's journey better than Joe, but the middle is just one dip in quality for me personally. Not a bad act, just one that gives way too much secondhand embarrassment. Plus, I had the thought that Joe's mother might have been mildly offended by Joe's existential speech, but she oddly isn't. I mean, I get it, we have to keep the pace going, but that's not how I'd imagine it to go. Overall, Soul is pretty good, but it still isn't one of my favorites of Pixar. And just in case anyone's wondering and they've not seen my Summer Scares Me video, I have seen I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, and it is better than Soul. Heroes Rising is pretty good. The idea of just watching the Class 1A students do stuff on a remote island does spawn an array of possibilities, and its execution was great. Every character got their spotlight somehow, and the character interactions are genuinely endearing. But then it ends with a cool concept that unfortunately needs to be reset to 0 since this is a filler movie. I enjoyed it better than Two Heroes, but they honestly need to start focusing on the series instead of these filler movies. Finally getting to our second new addition, Neja. Neja is the first installment in a sort of Chinese mythological god cinematic universe, followed by the recent Zhanzia. The story is based on the legend of Neja, but I wouldn't say that its presentation is 100% accurate, just retold in a more creative lens. In short, the gods accidentally reincarnate a demon pearl into the unborn child of a military commander. Once the demon child Neja is born, the commander and his wife keep him away from villagers since they view him as a menace to society, which he somewhat is. For someone with a lot of unlikable traits, it's hard to hate Neja since the film does a great job depicting how the other villagers and his own parents mishandle him, and then follows it up with the Dragon Prince Ao Bing treating him like an actual human being, before the plot kicks in and they predictably go at odds with each other. The humor is surprisingly crass and gross, but the boss action scenes totally make up for it, and the emotional beats are incredible. It's not one of my favorite films, but it is a very pleasant watch. Whole lot of walking, a whole lot of hitting one note over and over, a whole lot of deadpan expressions, and a whole lot of recorder solos. This movie is interesting. I can't say that this film leaves much of an impression when considering its characters and story, as it does kind of feel like a random assortment of stuff happening, but everything else is flippin' amazing. The visuals, the music, and especially the comedy. It's got a sort of Napoleon Dynamite feel to it. It's quirky, it's simple, it's stylistic, and it's especially funny. I don't know if I'll ever watch it a second time, but I'm glad I got to see it. While it's definitely not one of Pixar's all-time masterpieces, Onward is also definitely not inconceivably terrible. It's a pretty harmless film centered around light fantasy elements and the sibling relationship between Ian and Barley. There are some hiccups and film logic moments, plus the actual journey is somewhat fragmented, but the emotional beats really stick out, including a pretty great narrative twist that wholly stands out. And despite what some Ronins would say, this film absolutely nails its ending. Even though it isn't really that memorable of a movie, it's still a very cozy time. Yeah, I don't know why I consciously didn't include this in my original ranking video. Shaun the Sheep Farmageddon is a film that is about, unsurprisingly, Shaun the Sheep, but it also follows his interactions with an alien from outer space, and the rest of the film is about them trying to find a way back to the alien's home. While it is a pretty standard outline for a sci-fi space creature hunted down by government plot, there are bits and pieces that I genuinely like. In classic Shaun the Sheep matter, the film has absolutely no dialogue, just sounds, and it works wonders. Here's your proof that you need not any dialogue to make a good movie, you plebeians. And the production value and the claymation is on point. Like Onward, this is just a good time. If you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix, watch it. Based on production value alone, this should be miles lower on the list, but that just serves to show how much I love the writing in this film. The movie follows Meggie after the events of the previous year's episodes of SMG4, involving the anime arc and the post-anime arc, and we get to view the world specifically from her eyes as she's processing her trauma of watching her friend die in front of her. While the actual competition and games are somewhat spliced and the antagonists are hilariously cringe and one-dimensional, the character interactions are top-notch. Every single conversation, while not having particularly excellent dialogue, is just filled with such hilarity and resentment and compassion. Crime, but also, for lack of a better word, soul. After watching the Genesis arc, the scenes with Axel feel even more bittersweet than ever, and that ending hug with Maggie and Dusty never does not make me cry. While the actual series fluctuates in quality from time to time for me personally, this movie will always be the best SMG4 entry in my book. Yeah, this really did seem to be the year of sibling stories. So, Willoughbys is an animated film on Netflix that's about the Willoughbys. It follows 4 children on their quest to essentially murder their parents and live their own lives. Its dialogue is quick, snappy, and a genuine delight. The characters are pretty funny and energetic, and some of the slight horror aesthetic works. But the real hook of the film is the animation. Its CG depicted as stop-motion animation is totally on point, plus the color palette and the magenta yarn is such a beautiful touch, and the ending is genuinely wholesome and bittersweet. The song hits differently after the final act. I will admit I have never seen a lick of Lupin, but even then, I don't think I need to in order to watch this film, and it is downright amazing. Visually, it is a splendor to look at. Great character designs, funny physical antics, fluid animated movement, and gorgeous 2D to 3D transition. The story is simple enough for the characters to just be themselves. They are amazing. My one thing against this film is just that while the characters are very well characterized with good dialogue and interactions, there isn't a lot of character growth. There wasn't really a message to get aside from just the story, or I guess Letitia's little arc regarding her family kind of counts. You know what? Never mind. This movie is great. Well, this film is disturbing, alright. The Wolf House is a Chilean stop-motion animated horror film about a girl named Maria who runs away from a German colony in Chile. Upon finding a house in the forest, she stubbornly stays in the home until the very end. But the real kicker is the animation. The entire film, excluding the mockumentary sections, is just one continuous shot all throughout the house, exploring these uncomfortable displays made of masking tape, wires, paint, glass, the stains in painted over walls and glass, the welds in the 3D models, the wires hanging every sculpture up. You see everything from sets constructed slowly from the ground up and dents in the people's faces. It's a fascinating, literal unraveling of the mental state of Maria, centered around how her experiences affect her relationships with others. Its take on the 3 pigs and a wolf story is incredibly dark, especially given who the wolf is exactly. While it's not one of my favorite horror works of all time, since it didn't really make me feel any sort of suffocating dread like ReZero or Mum's Sweater, it is still a genuinely disturbing yet artistically marvelous piece of work. While I would have preferred this to be its own separate season, I found myself enjoying this better than when I first did. Sure, some of the drama is still redundant, some moments are kinda disposable, and bits and pieces of the dialogue are a bit on the nose, but Kyoto Animation still hasn't lost its touch with amazing visuals, great character interactions, and, as always with Hibike Euphonium, breathtaking music. It has something to say about merit versus seniority, as well as the subtle but not unseen trauma of being put through a life of failure, concerning the new character that is Kaori, as she believes that just because she's younger means that she's inferior. And Kumiko and Reina are still totally bi. Their interactions always make me smile. And gee, is it just me, or does this feel like a Liz and the Bluebird too? Jokes aside, this is a pretty fun and heartwarming watch for plenty of KyoAni fans. And yes, I know this is technically a 2019 film, but this is my video, not yours. I know that in my original review, I was way too soft on this movie, but it's still really great. While it is another case of introverted guy has his life changed by extroverted girl, for a nice change of pace, it focuses on the girl's perspective, even though they never really call out Muge's behavior and how it affects Hinode, at least not in an introspective and subversive way. However, I personally think the film is really great at characterizing Muge, partly because she kind of reminds me of one of my closest friends from my old school, but while 2/3 of the film is really excellent, that last act is still kind of a trash fire. Still, it's more than apt to say this film is cute and adorable, and there are cats in it, so what more could you ask for? If you want a romance story that actually has something to say about the divide between healthy and unhealthy relationships, Ride Your Wave is the film for you. Though this is less about the right partner than it is about the right time to move on. I'm still not going to spoil the thing that's given away in the trailer, but for this hot take, I really love the chemistry between our two characters. Just watching them do couple stuff is really adorable. Still, that climax is kind of out of left field, but the mature subject matter and its execution holds up as an amazing display of pure romance. Maybe it's not as great of a love story as WALL-E or Tamako Love Story, but it is a sort of good time. Violet Evergarden Eternity and the Auto Memory Doll is a beautifully animated film about the relationship between two distant siblings through the eyes of Violet, and admittedly this is better than the continuation movie. While it kind of overreaches with its emotional beats sometimes, like that one sequence of Taylor crying, its themes and discussions are very well grounded. Its narrative structure is unconventional, yet very well put together. Similarly to the continuation film, also Benedict gets to be a character. All around, Evergarden Eternity is just a masterpiece of a spin-off film that honestly can't touch Liz and the Bluebird, but is still an amazing side story. And speaking of Kyoto Animation and Science Saru, kind of, I have recently learned that Naoko Yamada is leaving KyoAni for Science Saru, and that her directorial debut from that studio will come out sometime soon. While I am sad that my favorite director is leaving my favorite studio, regardless of how melancholy that makes us all feel, I hope that Yamada will continue to make amazing animations that will further influence anime as a medium. Here's to a great future for you, Queen. Keep being awesome. Beautiful and spectacular animation, with a brilliant contrast between the lush, organic woods and the perspective skewing dull and straight-edged town. Fascinating POV shots with gorgeous magical sequences regarding the mythological lore. Great chemistry between our two leads, as well as impeccable voice acting. Awesome writing that is simple in concept but fantastic in execution. And to top it all off, a bittersweet Celtic soundtrack that makes my heart sing. I really love this movie to bits. I initially gave it some grief regarding the antagonist that is Oliver Cromwell, but now I think he's honestly a commendable villain that commits disturbing actions with equally disturbing motivations. Robin and Maeve are some of my favorite characters from 2020, and Maeve is just the best. And quick side note, I am very ecstatic that Eva Whittaker won Best Voice Actor/Actress in the Annie Awards. She clearly deserved it, and I hope she finds herself a successful and fulfilling voice acting career. So that's my list, and if you disagree, that's alright. You can like Soul however you please. 2020 was a pretty good year for animation, but so far 2021 has been miles better. That's the video, and I hope I didn't repeat any lines.